And joining me live today on WION is Ambassador John Bolton, former Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and the former United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for speaking with us on WION. Donald Trump has just posted a short while back that there's going to be the world's biggest reset. We're just a short while, we're a few hours away from these talks in Pakistan. I want to start by asking you what your expectations are from these talks.
Well, I think Trump is clearly looking for any way he can to get out of the war against Iran, and he's doing so because he has obviously seen the price of oil go up, seen the price of stocks go down, and that matters to him more than the strategic issues. He's tried to declare victory in several ways. He's tried to declare all military objectives have been met. He's said that we have changed the regime in Iran, even though we haven't. So I think the Iranian negotiators are going to see that Trump is worried about his own political prospects. It'll give them a significant advantage. The real question is, how many concessions does Vice President Vance make before it looks even worse politically for Trump to cave into some of these Iranian demands? And I think it's very much up in the air what comes next.
Ambassador Bolton, you talked about Vice President Vance as well as concessions. Let me begin with Vice President Vance. How do you see JD Vance leading the American delegation? What sort of an impact does it have domestically as well as globally, considering the fact that he's one of the few in the Trump cabinet who were not really in support of this aggression against Iran?
Well, that's certainly true by all public accounts. And we also know that Iran asked that Vance be the head of the U.S. delegation, which is really pretty remarkable when you think about it, even more remarkable that Trump agreed to it. Moreover, I'm not aware off the top of my head of any other significant international negotiation that a vice president has actually headed. This is very unusual, to say the least, because the vice president, by definition, is the next best thing to the president himself. And that's not who the Iranians are heading their delegation with. It could be the Speaker of their parliament, but really, unless you're in the Revolutionary Guard, you're not a top official of this government. And I think it puts Vance and Trump in a very difficult position, because if Vance does make a significant number of concessions, and we can discuss what those might be, but if it looks like he's trying to give away points in order to get some declaration that the Strait of Hormuz is open, or some declaration that Iran will not seek nuclear weapons, which they have happily done for the past 35 years and then ignored them, I think that could be real political downside for both Vance and Trump.
Ambassador, one of the biggest sticking points, as you said, has been nuclear weapons. Uranium enrichment is something that both sides have been talking about. But Iran says that it's only for civilian use. Do you see that as a justified reason for them to actually develop nuclear arms, nuclear energy?
Well, I think that's the excuse that many would-be proliferators around the world have used over time. And the other steps that Iran has taken to weaponize highly enriched uranium, I think convincingly prove that nuclear weapons are the real objective. And that's in part why they've got the advanced ballistic missile system they do, and a variety of other things. For all the behavior that Iran has shown, particularly now reaching to try and cut off commercial shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, according to centuries of tradition and international practice, that it's a narrow waterway fully open to the free maritime traffic of any commercial vessel, is a radical departure. And just think how their behavior would be if they had nuclear weapons too.
All right, Ambassador Bolton, this is something that supporters of Iran say, that look, you might say that they will use it as an excuse and they will eventually, use nuclear weapons against the United States, but they haven't done it so far. Then why is there so much fear about Iran using those nuclear weapons? Because so far, every time America has attacked or had any sort of aggressive action against Iran, it's only justified it by saying that, look, they will use nuclear weapons against us and these are preemptive strikes.
Well, I think we're justified in doing that. You know, they have for 47 years been calling America the Great Satan. And one of the first things their regime did in 1979 was take American diplomats hostage in Tehran for 444 days. You know, if people are interested in international law, that's the first signal that the regime of the Ayatollahs sent as to exactly what they think of international law and what their compliance with it will be. So I don't take any of their excuses at face value. And I think the fact that we know they were an eager customer of A.Q. Khan of Pakistan, one of the world's great nuclear proliferation entrepreneurs, buying from him things like the designs for centrifuges that A.Q. Khan stole from a European company when he worked for them, and quite possibly selling the design of nuclear weapons that Pakistan had gotten from China. We know, for example, A.Q. Khan sold nuclear weapons designs to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program, we got hold of those nuclear weapons designs, and they're in Chinese. So this connection, the same connection Pakistan has with North Korea and its nuclear weapons program, it shows what the Iranian objective is, I think, quite clearly, notwithstanding their public denials.
Ambassador Bolton, it's interesting that you talk about Pakistan and China, but I'm going to come back to that through that a bit later. I want to first talk to you about the Strait of Hormuz. That control still remains in the gray area. Donald Trump has, of course, said that a joint control can't be ruled out. But how do you see that panning out? Because Iran has reinstated and reiterated its control on the strait.
Well, I don't really think they have control. They have the power of intimidation at this point. They have obviously, by striking neutral commercial vessels in the Gulf during the course of the war, they've shown they're prepared to use military force against free commerce through the Gulf and through the Strait. I think that can be eliminated militarily. I think it's something, obviously, the U.S. has been concerned about. Since 1945, we've been concerned that no power outside the region or inside the region controlled all production of oil coming out of the Gulf area. So there are plans that could be activated. I'm sure in part they have been activated to make sure that neither Iran nor anybody else takes control of that narrow passage of water. And I just think it's unacceptable, given the precedent it would set for other countries that happen to be in that geographical position to do the same kind of thing. The Houthis in Yemen have tried to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the connection between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. That's unacceptable too. So there's a lot at stake here. If you believe in freedom of the seas, what Iran is doing is a gross violation of those norms. And people say they want a rules-based international order. Well, good luck with that. But here's a rule. This is a rule that goes back thousands of years in its development.
But Ambassador Bolton, that's the same argument that supporters of Iran give. They say that, look, there's an international law, there's an international guideline, which Israel and America have violated, number one. And number two, if you say that Iran doesn't really have direct authority on the Strait of Hormuz, what was making Donald Trump so frustrated that he even ended up using abusive words in his post and, reflected the kind of frustration that he had?
Well, I think the U.S. and Israeli action was complying with international norms. We pointed out in the national security strategy in the George W. Bush administration that a country is entitled to take preventive steps against a hostile country's effort to build nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction. You don't have to wait until the last possible moment when your innocent civilian population is threatened. So it's Iran that's the aggressor here in all material respects. And the reason Trump is in a panic is because of high gasoline prices at the pump and the political damage he thinks he's suffering in the United States. It's not a strategic issue. And I think the concessions that Vice President Vance may be about to make in these talks aren't from a strategic perspective either, but to protect Trump's domestic political base.
Okay. Let me also then ask you, Ambassador Bolton, about how Pakistan's role is being seen in this. Some say that it was just, relaying messages between both parties. Pakistan chooses to portray itself as the big mediator, the big peacemaker in this conflict. Then there was Donald Trump, the American president, who said that, look, it was China who actually got Iran onto the negotiating table. How do you see this?
Well, I think this whole affair has been very confused, to say the least. We've got a fundamental disagreement between the U.S. and Israel on the one hand, and Pakistan and Iran on the other, whether the truce covers Lebanon or not. The U.S. President and Vice President and the Israeli Prime Minister have said unequivocally they did not understand Lebanon to be covered. Pakistan and Iran have said differently. When you can't agree on a pretty important point like that, that tells you something about the nature of the so-called ceasefire agreement. And I think that kind of ambiguity could well have a major negative impact on the talks that could begin tomorrow in Pakistan.
All right. Do you see any sort of positive signals coming out of this meeting, Ambassador Bolton? Before I let you go, I just want to get a sense of how you're seeing these last few hours.
Well, I think it's going to remain confused, but I come back to my central point. I think Trump wants out for domestic political reasons. I think Iran sees panic, and I think they'll try and take advantage of it.
All right, all right. I'm going to leave it there. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much for speaking with us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Well, thank you very much for having me.